Some of the listeners are thinking, well, I'm not going to call up the CEO of $100 billion business and get a meeting with them. You may be right in that. However, it's always easier to work your way down an organization than work your way up an organization.
Welcome to the Pivotal Leader Podcast with Gina Trimaco, featuring lively interviews with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their stories and best practices for shifting business from problems to profits. Sit back and get ready to pivot.
Hey, everybody. This is Gina Trimaco, Chief Results Officer of Pivot 10 Results. Each week on the Pivotal Leader, I feature inspirational leaders who know how to positively impact their customers, employees, and brand through culture building. On this episode of the Pivotal Leader, I interviewed Hamish Knox. He plays an important role in Sandler's worldwide organization and is a recognized business development expert specializing in executive sales consulting and sales productivity training. He is a dynamic, enthusiastic speaker certified in the proprietary selling system developed by David Sandler. Knox informs, entertains, and motivates leadership and rank-and-file sales teams to achieve their full potential. He heads a Sandler Trainer Center in Calgary, which is very far up north, and recently released his new book, Accountability the Sandler Way, Creating a Leadership Mentality in 20 Minutes a Week. In this interview, we talk about how you can do that. So listen in and let's learn from Hamish. Hello, Hamish. Welcome to the Pivotal Leader.
Thanks for having me, Gina.
I'm excited to announce, I believe you are the first Canadian guest.
Sweet.
Yeah, I've had people from all over the world, but not Canada until today.
Excellent. I'm number one in Canada.
So first off, congrats on your new book, Accountability the Sandler Way.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to write.
We'll talk a little bit about that. There's so much I want to talk about. I do have to say that at some point we were going back and forth on LinkedIn and you said something about improv. You have some sort of sign in your office.
So on the wall of our training room, it says sales is improv, and really life is improv.
Amen. It really, really is. Do you have an improv background?
I don't. I've been a stand-up comedy fan. I've been listening to George Carlin since I was like 7 years old, which probably wasn't a very good parental choice. I've been a fan of comedy in general and improv because it really is, there's no script when you're talking to a client or a prospect or a candidate or an employee.
Exactly. The one thing that kind of drives me a little crazy in some sales training, of course, not our companies, but when everybody is so hung up on the playbook and the process, and I've flipped the script on that, and I call it now like, do you have a book of play versus a playbook? Mm-hmm. How do you get a little more playful in the conversation? By being more human. Exactly,
and by staying present.
Yes, staying so present. I think people get so stuck in their heads of that sales conversation, of everything that they're going to say and they want to remember to say, and they do kind of anticipate what objections are going to be, and so they've got kind of this script in their head, and the script's in their head, and so they're not actually really listening.
No, not at all.
I love your LinkedIn page in general, because you have a more interesting intro and description about yourself, but someone referred to you as the behavior guy.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? That really actually pulled me in because I'm all about behavior change in sales training. So tell me a little more about you, the behavior guy.
So, and I'm a bit of a neuroscience nerd too, Gina. I actually have a model of a human brain in my training room.
Oh, cool.
Talk about that with our clients, because really that's what I'm doing is behavior change and attitude change, mindset change, things like that. And so I did a speaking engagement for a CEO group. A consultant came up to me afterwards and goes, "I totally get you now." And I went, "Great. I don't get myself. Help me out." And he said, "You're the behavior guy." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he's like, "Well, I'm a strategy consultant." I said, "Yeah, you do really good work." He said, "Yeah, well, really what we do with our clients is it's kind of like we build them a car, and then we throw the keys at them and say, we're going to come back in a quarter and hopefully you haven't completely destroyed the car. You're the guy who can teach them how to drive the car." And I went, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." And I also can teach them how to do cool tricks with the car once we got the foundational elements put together. But that resonated with me, and it became my LinkedIn summary, because it really, that's what we are doing. We're not about scripts and cheesy lines that no one likes or never have worked. We're about implementing and influencing people's behavior and making it successful by design instead of by default.
And how do we change some of those behaviors? So people get so stuck on their script and they need the structure. And I don't even want to get into generational differences of people needing to know exactly what to do, what to say. How are some of the ways that you are able to help people change some of those behaviors?
It's a great question. And it starts actually not even with the behavior, but with the mindset or their outlook. Okay. One of the recurring talk tracks in my training is, mom told us never to talk to strangers. Well, what's a cold call? Mm-hmm. So I can teach you 47 new ways to make cold calls, but who's going to win, me or mom? And mom always wins.
That's so interesting. I've never really thought about it like that, right? Because that kind of was wired into your head. Totally.
And so we all have these different scripts and one of the stories that I tell is I have a pleaser script. I've done therapy. I've been identified as a pleaser for 6 months in the Sandler business. I made 5,000 cold calls. I had about 4 instances of this, and it was always a man. And hey, it's Hamish calling from Sandler. Probably never heard of me. Listen, just tell me what you got, and I'll tell you if I want to buy it. And because my pleaser script kicked in, I would say, well, I'm with Sandler and we're good and we should do stuff and maybe we want to meet. And that wasn't my tonality, but that was how I came across, I think. Yeah. And inevitably it was, yeah, thanks. Do you have a website? Click. I had been journaling about it and really sort of, getting frustrated with myself. And so one day someone said that to me, listen, just tell me what you got and I'll tell you if I like it. And I took a pause and I went, and we'll say the person's name was Dan. And I said, Dan, I'd love to tell you who I am and why I gave you a call, but based on the way you answered the phone, no matter what comes out of my mouth next, you're probably going to tell me to pound sand. Is that fair? And instantly, my prospect became a human being. And he's like, well, no, but I'm getting audited and my accountants are in. And I empathized. And I said, oh, Dan, that sucks. That must be really frustrating. He said, yeah, it is. I'm really sorry about how I answered the phone. Can you give me your elevator pitch and maybe we can set up another time to speak? And I said, okay. And so I gave him my 30-second commercial and he said, you know what? That's really not on my plate. And I said, hey, that's fair. It's not for everybody when we first get engaged. But out of curiosity, who is another open-minded CEO or two in our network, in our neck of the woods, who might want to take a phone call from me? And he gave me a name, and that person ended up doing business with me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What do you think the moral of that story is? What's the takeaway of that for people?
Number one is stay present and don't react to what is coming at you. Respond to it in a, intellectual is not necessarily the right word, but don't just lash back at somebody in a reactionary way. Take it in. And also remember, it's never about you.
Oh, I was just going to say that. Gosh, we're so alike.
I'm sorry I stepped on your line. And, Dan revealed himself to me. It wasn't me that was the problem. It was the fact that he was getting audited that was the problem.
Yeah. But you took the time to pay attention to that. And like you said, be present and pick up on that cue. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a major cue. And I think people miss it, right? They're so focused on themselves and selling what they're selling. They're not paying attention to what's going on with the buyer.
For the present day, we are still selling to human beings. Right. And every one of us has our own scripting and head trash and outlooks on the world and things that are happening to us during the day and during the week. And then someone happens to come across our path. And, I've got 2 young children and I've never said to either of them, I want you to be a salesperson when you grow up. I've said entrepreneur, which is code for salesperson. But especially when you are going out and selling, they're not hearing it's Gina, the wonderful human being who may be able to support them and change the way they do things and make their life or their business better. All they hear is, there's another salesperson calling.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the knee-jerk reaction. I've told this story a few times, so for people who listen to this podcast, I apologize. I probably should get a new story. This happened recently, though, where it was a prospect that probably on my list for 3 years. And one day I decided, to pull out pull out the old list and start working it. I sent this person an email because I think that's also important to know what communication style works best, especially on your warm leads. And I know she's busy. So I just sent an email and said, hey, just kind of want to circle back, catch up with you. We haven't talked in a while. There's some new changes in our company. I want to hear about changes in your company. And she replied back, hey, we really want to work with you. Wow. Now, not once did I say anything about work, but then I got the but, right? Because I always talk about yes and, but I got the yes but.
Of course.
But we have your information. I always think of you. You're on my mind for reaching out to you, but it's just not feasible right now. And I replied, I just wanted to catch up with you. I didn't want to even talk to you about training. Just wanted to catch up. And she's like, oh, okay, how's Wednesday at 4? And so we got on a call, found out what was going on with them. I was able to relate back some industry-related stories to her because it's an industry that I have a lot of experience in. Kind of updating her on things I've learned. And by the end of the conversation, she's like, we got this big training thing coming up for all of our locations. And I don't know. Well, maybe. Well, could you just put something together of what it could look like if you came in? And I said, sure. I'm like, let's talk money. Let's talk budget. Let's just get that out of the way. Yeah. Because this was the first time they're going to bring someone in from the outside. So that's always a challenge, right? To sell that. Totally. Long story short, I have a contract with them.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it goes back to really being in the moment with them, like you're saying, and putting it back on them. It's about them. And right. I approach it I'm all about relationships. I call people every day, and you could call them sales calls, but I don't think of them as sales calls, which then that goes back to mindset.
Right. Yeah. Be curious.
Exactly. Which is a huge improv thing, right?
Yes.
Always being curious. Let's talk a little bit about accountability, because that is a big word in your book title. So let's kind of jump in and talk about that. And that word accountability often conjures up images of micromanagers controlling their employees.
Yeah.
Every move. What's your point of view on accountability, especially with salespeople?
Absolutely. It's a big, scary word. My background, dovetails nicely into accountability. I grew up on a farm, and then I was a journalist. And, in both of those worlds, you have to be accountable to doing activities on a daily basis. In one case, because the animals are going to die if you don't. And in the other case, because there's going to be a giant white hole in the paper where your article should have been. Mm-hmm. Is now just a giant piece of white space. So when I look at accountability, yes, if every day I'm coming to you, if you're one of my salespeople, and I say, hey, Gina, what are you doing about this? And hey, Gina, what opportunities are you working on? And hey, Gina, when are you going to a networking event? Yeah, I'm a pushy micromanager. But if at the start of the week, we have a really quick 5-minute or less conversation, hey, Gina, happy Monday. What's on your plate this week? Prospecting activities, opportunities you're going to advance or move out of your funnel. What's going on? And you say, well, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And I say, that's great. Talk to you on Friday. Let me know where I can support you throughout the week. And then Friday, we sit down, we have a bit of a longer meeting, 15 minutes or less, and say, hey, Gina, let's look at your week. On Monday, you said you were going to this, 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 and this. How'd it go? And the Sandler rule goes, they can't argue with their own data. So if it comes out of your mouth, it's real. If it comes out of my mouth, I'm a pushy micromanager.
I like that. So what are some other strategies for implementing an effective and sustainable accountability program?
Number one is the leader's got to go first. This is not a good enough for my subjects, not good enough for the king or queen, so to speak. Where accountability programs fail is when the leader says, thou shalt, and everyone else says, well, what about you? And they say, I'm good. I got that accountability stuff down. No, the leader needs to really be out there and demonstrating through their behavior, because, humans are animals, and animals don't have a capacity to process language. and they look at behavior. And if the behavior is incongruent with the words, they're going to take the behavior as what's the real truth. So a leader really needs to be congruent with accountability. And that means if we're going to have an accountability meeting, I, as the leader, better show up for that meeting every week, or I've just told you everything you need to know about being accountable in our organization.
Mm-hmm. You reference, your title references creating a leadership mentality in 20 minutes a week.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a very small amount of time that's very easy to do.
Yes.
So yet how do we do that in only 20 minutes? What if you have like a really big team? Like, tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does sound, in some cases, it can sound overwhelming. I get a lot of feedback from leaders like, Hamish, you don't understand. I've got so many direct reports. And when we actually ran the numbers, with one leader who had 14 direct reports, and to implement this 20 minutes a week accountability and do a role play with every individual of their team was going to be under 4.5 hours. And so that's like 10-ish% of a work week. So it can sound overwhelming, but really what it comes down to is lock it in the calendar. So Monday morning, 5-minute or less check-in with every one of your team individually. Very much what I did both sides of that role play is, Gina, what are you going to do this week in terms of activities, numbers of activities, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the Friday or the last work day of the week, you run that 15-minute review meeting, and we call it a recon meeting because it's about reviewing and evaluation, talking about what needs to change next week if things didn't go the way that your salesperson thought they would. Also reviewing any opportunities that they're working on, and as well about talking about the next week and what's going to happen next. And because it's 15 minutes and recon, if you break it down, is 5 steps, it's very chapter heading only. And where leaders can go sideways is they start to dive into the weeds. Mm-hmm. And that's not the purpose. The purpose is to say, what are you going to do? What did you do? How can I support you?
Yeah. So it's helpful probably to know a little bit about each one of those people's kind of what's going on with them prospect wise, what's in the pipeline, yes. But not necessarily have to know every detail of it, because that's a lot for a leader to have to take on.
Very much so. And really this all, if we level it all the way back, is the critical thing about an accountability program is, does the leader understand what their employees' personal goals are? And one of the recurring talk tracks with the leaders that we work with is, people don't work for you because they love your company. They work for you because working for you gets them to their personal goals faster than working for somebody else.
That's a really important one. I don't think a lot of leaders, I want to say ineffective leaders, are the ones who do not take the time, because I think that's a big emotional intelligence piece.
Very much so. And it's squishy, and it's like, they just work for me. I don't really need to know that they want to buy a house or they want to send their kid to college. And actually, you really do.
Yeah, you really do.
That's their motivation.
Right. So do you have any advice around that? I do a session called Managing the F Word, F being F being feelings and emotions, how to manage the F word as a leader and being more emotionally intelligent and in tune to your team and where they're coming from. Do you have any strategies around, especially those who are not squishy? How can they get better at that?
And it goes to the V word, which probably comes up in your workshop, which is vulnerability. And really having the leader go first. So when we run a goal setting workshop and we talk personal and professional and all that, we have the leaders stand up and share first.
Nice.
And then the rest of the team shares, because what I've found is once the leader stands up and is vulnerable, the rest of the team goes, oh, well, if they're going to do it, then clearly I can do it, as opposed to, okay, boss says I got to share my goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. How often do you suggest that be worked on, of staying up to date on people's personal goals?
Great question. Annual goal setting, of course, and then really a monthly or at the very latest a quarterly check-in. And once you know the goals, you're not you're not holding someone accountable to their personal goals necessarily, because they're their goals and they're going to hold themselves accountable to getting there. But a casual question of, hey, Hamish, how's it going? How's it going with getting the college fund up and running? Or how can I support you getting that college fund up and running? It shows interest. It shows caring. It shows emotional intelligence. I may just say, well, you know what? I'm good with that. I got a financial planner. We've got something set up. Thanks for asking. And that's all that needs to be said. What I've found is if you start to go deeper than that, sometimes we can get into crossing personal lines that the leader doesn't intend to cross, but the employee's like, listen, I'm comfortable sharing with you, but I don't need you to be living in my house with me.
Yeah. But the thing is that just showing the slight amount of interest makes a person feel like, wow, you actually listened to me.
Yeah.
Which makes me feel like you care about me.
Exactly.
Which creates that commitment, that loyalty, that, along those lines of people don't quit companies, they quit managers, that typical line. Showing the slightest amount of interest, I think, is what keeps people engaged.
Very true. Very, very true.
Have you ever been to Zappos' headquarters in Las Vegas?
I've not had a chance to. I hear it's amazing.
It's amazing. And I went to one of they have a whole division now that does training for other companies. And I went to one of their 3-day culture camps and really got a feel for how they create a really healthy culture. And one of the things, they do so many amazing things, but one of the things that they do is that every employee gets a life coach.
Wow.
Yeah. So along that concept of making sure that employees set personal goals.
Yeah.
So that they're well-rounded, and how can the company help them get there, right? So again, it's squishy, but I think it's so necessary to keep people motivated and engaged.
Well, if you don't have any mountaintops to shoot for, then you're just kind of going through the motions.
Right. You reference getting employees to buy into the cookbook or having a cookbook. Tell me more about your cookbook.
Yeah, cookbook is one of Sandler's big buzzwords, and really what it means is a behavior plan or an activity plan. So any one of your listeners who's ever trained for a marathon or in any sort of endurance race would know it as a training plan. I'm going to do so much of these particular activities over the course of the day, week, month in order to hit my goal, and that's really what a cookbook is. It's the controllable behaviors. So, in a sales context, those are things like prospecting calls, asking for introductions, quarterly client review meetings, having, discovery meetings, going to networking events, doing social selling. And from a leadership perspective, those are things like having accountability meetings and coaching and role playing and interviews. Even if there isn't an open role, we encourage all of our leaders to always be recruiting. So having an interview every week with a prospective candidate, even if you don't have an open role, because if you find a rock star, you'll probably find a place for them on your team. So getting the team to buy in really starts with forgetting the whole concept of a cookbook and saying to the team, all I want you to do for the next 30 days is track the proactive behaviors you're doing that are creating success in your business. Because you guys are already awesome. I just want to understand how you're getting to being awesome. And so at the end of the month, you sit down and you say, okay, now we have a data set. And then from that data set, you can build a cookbook, which is that series of targets against certain activities that is set up monthly goals, but it's reviewed weekly because now we have leading indicators and we can very quickly see if we're on or off pace to hitting our goals.
What are some need to have versus nice to have behaviors? Let's talk more about specific behaviors.
Great question. And we'll focus on sales role, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from a sales perspective, and it will really come down to what kind of role does the person have? Are they primarily net new business development? Are they primarily client service or account management? Or are they a blend of both? But really, what we want to see is asking for introductions is a really key, need to have behavior. Also giving introductions. All salespeople strive to be trusted advisors. Trusted advisors give their clients introductions. And one of my clients was struggling with this idea a little bit. And they said, well, I don't know anyone who I could introduce my client to who is a prospect of theirs. And I said, well, that's fine. But they have lots of other stuff going on in their business that doesn't relate to prospects and clients. Like you might walk in and say, Hamish, how's your day going? And I say, well, you know what? My copier is on the fritz and I'm sick and tired of working with my current provider. They overpromise and underdeliver. And you might say, well, you know what? I know someone at a different, office machine company. Would you be open to an introduction? And now I don't see you as just another salesperson. I see you as a trusted advisor who has the best interests of my business in mind.
It's again, going back down to listening.
Yes.
And hearing what's going on with someone to be able to be a problem solver for them.
Exactly. And also in a way that may not directly impact your pocketbook.
Right. Not directly.
Exactly. So asking for introductions, in an account management, quarterly client reviews would be a really critical metric to have. How many of those in a more new business development or hunter type role? We're going to be looking for number of unique conversations with decision makers. And a unique conversation is exactly that. It's really the first time you've ever talked to that decision maker about a particular product or service. We say decision makers specifically because lots of salespeople, and I know I used to be this salesperson early in my career, we'll talk to people who can only say no to us, or I'd like to think about it, as opposed to people who can say yes or no.
Well, let's dive into that for a second, because I think this is a big question that comes up for a lot of people is how do you find the ideal decision makers? And I think this is kind of a two-part question, because there's sometimes people think a certain person is a decision maker, but they're really not the decision maker. I hope this is making sense. Yeah,
very, very true. So one side of that, actually, one of my very first clients, they sold to airlines, and I would say regularly in session is call as high as you can go, call the president, call the CEO, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, well, you know what, Hamish, the president really could care less about my product or service. And I said, okay, well, who does? And they said, it's the VP of operations. And I said, okay, tell me more about that. Can they cut you the check, et cetera, et cetera? And they said, yes. I said, great, call the VPs of operations. That's awesome. And so they started calling VPs of operations. And sometimes the VP would say, you know what, you got to talk to my director of operations. And they would say, okay, that's great, director of operations, and they could manage that process. But when it comes down to figuring out who is the decision maker, what I encourage all my clients to do is actually get the word decision out of their vocabulary, because it's a giant emotionally charged word, kind of like budget. And instead, what I encourage them to say is the word selection.
Love that.
So if I say to you, Gina, how are you going to go about selecting a new CRM system? Well, all of a sudden, you are probably going to give me a whole bunch more information than if I just said, how's the decision process work? Yeah,
that's awesome advice.
Thank you.
Again, it's that whole mindset piece and how you frame it.
True. You be non-threatening, right? Prospects are, that people love to buy and hate to be sold as a cliche for a reason. And prospects have their walls up. And we need to be able to bring those walls down first before we can have that human to human conversation.
Right. For the longest time, and I'm sure you may have gone through this, I was taking the wrong approach of who I was going to for the selection process. And no longer saying decision making. I was going to the wrong department in the selection process. And I realized it was more of my own issue personally of kind of like what you just said, well, the president doesn't care. The CEO doesn't care. Or I was, oh, they don't want to be bothered. But that's really where I do have to go. And I had to get over my own fear of that. I think there's some fear around going to the top.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you have any advice around that. I have found some really great ways now to go straight to the top. But I think that's a question that comes up a lot. How do we get to the top?
And really, it's exactly what you just said is just go there. One of those 5,000 cold calls that I made was to the CEO of a $2.6 billion publicly traded company here in my city. And there's a concept that I train my clients on called equal business stature. You're just two human beings having a conversation. Mm-hmm. If there's no fit, shake hands, part friends, that's fine. If there is a fit, you'll mutually agree as to how you want to move down that path. So I believed, well, this CEO is just another human being, just like me. I have the right to talk to them. So I called up and I, of course, got their executive assistant. And
right.
I worked with them and they passed me on to the CEO. And the CEO immediately downshifted me, as I expected them to.
Right.
But when they said, you need to call my Canadian sales manager, I said, great, happy to do that. But when I called the Canadian sales manager, I said, the CEO said you were the best person to talk to in this company.
Oh, brilliant.
So now they felt awesome, right? Oh, hey, the CEO thinks I'm the best person in the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with the CEO, especially at those larger organizations, because some of the listeners are thinking, well, I'm not going to call up the CEO of $100 billion business and get a meeting with them. You may be right in that. However, it's always easier to work your way down an organization than work your way up an organization.
That was a great soundbite for this podcast. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And with the CEO, it's to be disarmingly honest. So when I connect, I connect with Gina, who's the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company. And I say, hey, Gina, it's Hamish calling, looking for a little bit of help. You may not be the right person for me to speak with, but I figured you'd know who the best person was.
I hope everybody takes that in. That's such a great nugget for anybody in sales that is trying to get to the top of the heap, to get back down to the right person.
And this actually happened again early, 6 months in when I started my Sandler business, and I had left 3 voicemails for the CEO of it was a $1 billion chemical company, and their executive assistant called me back, and we have a rule that when the executive assistant calls you, they are the CEO, because that's really what their role is. Their role is to be the CEO. And so they said, the CEO's on holidays, but it sounded like it was important for you to speak with them. So they asked me to call you back. I said, hey, I really appreciate that. And let's say that their name was Sandra. I think it was Sandra. And so I said, Sandra, I'm not really sure if they are the right person to speak with, but maybe you can help me out figure who the right person is. I'm with Sandler. We typically, and gave my 30-second commercial. And she said, no, they're actually not the right person to talk to. It's the senior VP of sales. And I said, appreciate that. They're probably not in the office today. And they said, no, they're in Houston, but let me transfer you. And they transferred me directly to the senior VP's cell phone.
That's awesome.
And we ended up having a great conversation. We didn't end up doing any business because, it's not the right fit for everybody. But I was able to have a real conversation because, again, when I got connected with the senior VP, I said, hey, Sandra thought you were the best person to talk to.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're picking up a lot of information, even if you're not talking to the right person or getting the deal.
Very true.
I don't know about you, but I get such an adrenaline rush when in the pursuit of it. Maybe it's a mindset thing again. I love the journey of it. I love the journey of uncovering who to talk to, how to get there. That to me is fun.
It is. That's my background as well. Is I have the real sort of hunter mindset. When previous company, one of my colleagues who was an outside salesperson, I was an inside salesperson. He said, you guys up front, there was 3 of us in the inside sales team. We sat right near the front door. He said, you guys make us in the back feel real nervous. And I said, why? And he said, because you guys will find the name of a company, you'll go to their website, you'll find the name of the CFO, you'll pick up, or the CEO, you'll pick up the phone and call them.
Yes, of course.
And I was like, but isn't that the job? I'm confused.
I know, right?
But not a common, right? Mom told us never to talk to strangers.
Right.
I've been told no a lot in my life. So I probably fit very well for sales because you get to hear no a lot.
Yeah. I have grown up with a lot of different interesting, I guess, human life, everyday life sales training, right? Like my dad made us work in a flea market every weekend. And you want to talk about learning negotiation and having to be able to communicate and talk to people. My dad was many things, but he was also a self-taught locksmith, and he taught us how to make keys. And so we had key machines in this flea market. And can you imagine someone comes up to the table and they want a key made and they're like, "Where's the locksmith?" And I'm like, "I can make your key." And they're like looking at this 11-year-old going, "What?"
Right.
I'm like, "No, I got this. I know how to do this." And I learned early, and I think, children are the best salespeople, and I do a whole training session on that. I learned early, like as a child, to pay attention to them, and I could see it in the customer's face. I said, "Listen, if the key doesn't work, just bring it back and I'll cut a new one." Right? Without them saying what their fear was. I knew what their fear was. They're looking at me as I'm a child, and how can I possibly make the key correctly?
Totally.
Those little life skills, I don't even know why I went on that tangent, of the things that we learn along the way to pay attention.
Yeah. And it's really not, and going back to mindset, it's really, they're not saying no to Gina or Hamish, or they're saying no to a salesperson.
Right.
That they don't see the person behind the role. All they hear is, "Oh, there's a salesperson on the phone."
Yeah. And they're also saying no to their own fears about the conversation.
Totally.
They're saying no to having a conversation because you're taking their time and they're fearful they're not going to get their work done. They're saying no to their fear of making the wrong decision by buying what you're selling and looking bad at work. They're saying no to a series of emotional situations.
Right.
Going back to it's not about you. It's really about them and what they're going through.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about, what's your perspective on our rising workforce, our younger workforce, and some of their interpersonal skills? I talked to David about this a little bit, about that interpersonal connection. We so many people stuck on technology and not really, creating relationships. And I recently also interviewed Tom Neeson, who's a Sandler trainer out of Dallas, and his opinion that we'll need less salespeople because so much of the buyer's decision is made way before they even talk to a salesperson. Can you share some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and it's a little different being up in Canada, because we don't necessarily have the same population size or the same pace of business, and that's not a criticism. We're two different countries, and what I have seen is, yes, the younger generation, and now I saw a headline that said the existential angst of millennial no longer meaning young person. Now we're over Generation Z. We're learning how to use technology effectively to create relationships. And internet is a wonderful and terrible thing, and all of this, and the technology is wonderful and terrible. And I don't think we've really adapted our brains and adapted our mindsets to how does this actually work. We're still working in a very eyeball to eyeball handshake type environment, except now all of that has been removed and we're just going off of text. Mm-hmm. And then once we get into text, all of our scripts in our head trash, and we're interpreting what I think the other person meant by this text communication. What I'm starting to feel is we're swinging back the other way, and I'm even starting to notice that with the younger salespeople and younger leaders that I'm working with, is they recognize the value of social media and text-based communication for exchanging unambiguous, uncontroversial information, but they are now understanding that when there is the opportunity for ambiguity, it is best to, at the very least, have a voice-to-voice conversation, if not some kind of eyeball-to-eyeball, whether that's literally in person or over a video conference.
And what kinds of things do you do in your training to help with that?
Really encouraging them to get eyeball to eyeball as much as possible. Again, whether that's over a video conference or at least getting voice to voice. But there's something that we all have to respect, which is reciprocity and mode of communication. And you mentioned this earlier when you talked about that prospect that you had reached out to by email, is if you send me an email, you are expecting me to respond by email. Mm-hmm. And I've had it, because I'm a phone guy. I like to get on the phone or get in person. I've had it multiple times before I learned the lesson, where I'd get an email from you and I'd think, well, instead of 9 emails back and forth, how about I have a 5-minute call with Gina, pick up the phone, dial the number, and you say hello, and I go, hey, Gina, it's Hamish, and just right away I can feel you physically moving away from the phone. Because you're not expecting a phone call, you're expecting an email.
Right.
But what I coach my clients on is to say, if you do need to go voice to voice or eyeball to eyeball, is you still have to respond back via email, via text, and say, Gina, great question. Probably better for us to spend 5 minutes on the phone instead of 5 emails back and forth. And my clients have a very high success rate in their prospects saying, yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't want to waste a whole bunch of time firing emails back and forth. Yeah. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah. I do an improv exercise that, speaking of eyeball to eyeball, it's a really uncomfortable eyeball to eyeball kind of exercise that, like, the younger salespeople, it like totally freaks them out. They hate it. They're so uncomfortable with it. And I purposely make it highly uncomfortable, over the top, of really having to make that eye connection to prove the point of how important it is that if you are in person with someone, how important that connection is in creating a better relationship.
Love it.
I'm doing a fun like networking thing this week for Costco. Our local Costco does and maybe they all do it, I don't know, but our local Costco does a monthly networking event. It's like at 7:30 in the morning, and I'm going to be leading all their networking. Like, I'm going to lead that morning for them, because, you know, you go to these networking events and the first thing people are doing is shoving cards in your hands.
Blackjack dealers.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. I'm going to use that on Friday.
Please steal.
Please do not be blackjack dealers. So I'm forcing them into those kind of uncomfortable exercises where they're not allowed to be shoving cards down people's throats. It makes me crazy.
Love it.
Anyway, a couple quick things, and then we're going to get ready to wrap it up. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Sandler training works? Not everybody is in Calgary, but they can find, local Sandlers as well, or go to Calgary. But what are some ways that people can get involved with Sandler training?
Probably the best way is go to sandler.com, and then near the top of the homepage, there'll be a find a local training location, and that's all mapped out. So punch in your address and it'll give you the local trainers in the area. Also, they can go to sandler.com/sell and access the e-learning library if they're looking for some specific content. Cool. That's probably the two best ways to get engaged. And then really it comes down to having a conversation with that local trainer and figuring out if it's a good fit.
Okay. Does Sandler do programs that are for a general public that can come, or besides corporate, come into our company? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So when someone says, do you do blank? The answer is typically yes. And really it comes down to what are they trying to accomplish? So if it's a smaller team or an individual, we run we call them public sales and leadership development programs. And then for larger organizations, then definitely we go in and do more of a customized program for them. But also myself and colleagues will run regular boot camps. So our next one, for example, is advanced interpersonal communications, how to have better human-to-human relationships. And I've had several couples, personal couples, partners, spouses come in and they spend the whole day saying, oh, so that's why you do it. Oh, now I get. And it's really awesome to see, because I get emails later saying, changed our relationship. I'm so glad we came. Thank you very much. And that's, yes, increases in sales, profits, all that kind of good stuff is awesome. But when someone comes to me and says, you've changed my life, that's amazing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, lately I've had a few CEOs say to me I should be doing retreats for couples. And I was like, what?
Yeah,
What are you talking about? But because a lot of what we do is so communications based
totally.
in creating relationships, that kind of got me thinking. To me, it was like, oh, it's an interesting buying cue of something new to come up with maybe. So you have a boot camp coming up. When's that coming up?
Friday, September 14th.
Do you ever use improv in what you're doing?
Yeah, a couple of ways. Number one is we actually have a local improv troupe in Calgary who I've brought in regularly over my Sandler career to train my clients in improv techniques.
Great.
And they love, status games and zombie game and some various other ones. And then in my sales leadership program and my sales mastery program, especially sales mastery, 90% of our sessions are improv-based role plays. So I'll create a platform or a scene, and one person is prospect, one person is salesperson, and the other people in their pod are observers. And we roll the scene, and then we do a debrief, because debrief is the most important part of role play.
Mm-hmm.
And we just copy, paste, repeat. And it's amazing that the learnings that come out of that, because I can't script almost everything that comes out that comes up in debrief, and these aha moments that my clients are having that I never could have given them if we weren't doing role play.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, great. I'm happy to hear that. That is so cool. What are some ways that you personally get some support or guidance or advice for yourself?
Great question. So I have a couple of coaches. One of them is through Sandler, and then I have a mentor I've been working with since my business started. I'm also in an accountability group. I'm sure you're shocked with the topic of the book that we're talking about. An accountability group with several of my Sandler colleagues from actually all around the world, which is quite cool. Very different perspectives from people in different countries. And then I'm also a member of a CEO support group that meets once a quarter, and we talk through some challenges that we may be having, some opportunities that we're looking at. I get support that way. And then the other thing I do is I've been training in Thai boxing for 7.5 years. Ooh. Sometimes it's good to go hit a heavy bag for an hour.
That's very cool. That I haven't heard that one come up, so that's good. I've been thinking about going to one of those boxing franchise kind of places where you can go take a boxing related workout. If that makes any sense. I forget what it's called.
There's a bunch of them that have come out recently. And actually, I just did, I got invited to do a fundraiser at one of those. And we were doing a cancer fundraiser for an 11-year-old boy who was going to a special camp. And it was a ton of fun because we got to go in and burn a bunch of calories for 45 minutes. And, at the end come out and we're all sweaty and we're like, well, I guess we're all people.
Back to that vulnerability piece.
Absolutely.
If people want to connect with you, get a hold of you, work with you, what are some of the best ways to connect with you?
Best way is LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Please mention that you heard me on the Pivotal Leader or connected with me through Gina. Also, I'm really easy to find. If you Google Hamish and Sandler, there's not very many Hamish out there. So I'm pretty easy to find that way. And then you can connect with us through our website and have a conversation with me, or come down to Orlando and visit me when we're have our Sales and Leadership Summit next March.
Oh, cool. I wanted to go to that last year and I couldn't. So I'm hoping I'm going to make it to the next one.
I would love it if you could come down next year. My colleague Haley and I did a 45-minute improvised role play on accountability in front of 800 leaders.
Oh, how cool.
It was a ton of fun.
How cool. Okay, well, I'm going to definitely find a way to do that. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Pivotal Leader.
Thank you very much for having me, Gina. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thanks again to Hamish for being on the Pivotal Leader today. And thank you to our listeners for listening in. And till next time, if you want to maximize, you need to be willing to improvise. Now take us out, cool voiceover guy.
You've been listening to The Pivotal Leader with Gina Trimaco, owner and founder of Pivot 10 Results and Carolina Improv Company. You can find show notes for this episode on our website at thepivotalleader.com. The Pivotal Leader is a production of Pivot 10 Results, a strategy and training company that helps businesses shift from people problems to performance results. If your company needs help pivoting to success, visit pivot10results.com or email Gina at gina@pivot10results.com. And until next time, if you're feeling stuck in your business, it's probably time to pivot.